They were running before people even understood they were a problem. The first thing people learned about the Bekele sisters was that they never came alone. Not because they needed backup. Because they were the backup, for each other, always, even when the world had already taken everything else. It started in Chicago, the night the sirens came too late and did not bring their parents home. Only silence did. The kind of silence that doesn't fade, it settles, in walls, in breath, in memory. The kind you can hear even when everything else is loud. They sat afterward in a hospital corridor in matching plastic chairs under flickering lights that kept pretending they were stable, like nothing important had just broken. Sela looked at Zola. Zola looked at Sela. And something irreversible happened there, not spoken, not explained, just decided in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The kind of decision that doesn't need language because language would only make it smaller. They were 16. They had each other. They had the tattoo they would get 1 year later, a split Ethiopian cross on the right forearm, one half each, ink slow and deliberate like a vow being sealed under skin. Not decoration. Not identity. A warning. A promise. The kind of mark that says, if one of us disappears, the other will not accept the story. And they had a plan. Chicago already had its wolves. You didn't see them at first, you felt them when people stopped speaking as you passed, when footsteps changed rhythm behind you, when silence learned your name. But that was Chicago. Seoul had not learned its wolves yet. Not when the Bekele sisters arrived. Not when they stepped into a city that would eventually understand what it means when two people move like one consequence. Welcome back, Dark Romance family. Before this story pulls you under and you forget to breathe, subscribe if you are new here, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. Lagos to London, Atlanta to Seoul, this community is everywhere and every single one of you keeps these stories alive. We built something real here together. So find your quiet, dim your lights, and do not make any plans for the next 40 minutes. You will not want to stop. Addis Ababa gave them their faces and Chicago gave them their edges and Seoul gave them their empire, and the order of those three things matters because none of it was accidental. Samuel and Desta Bekele had fled Ethiopia in the early 90s, political pressure, the specific danger of being educated and outspoken in a government that preferred neither, and had landed in Chicago's South Side with 2 daughters, a rented apartment, and the particular determination of people who had already survived one impossible thing and believed survival was a transferable skill. For 14 years it worked. Samuel drove overnight freight. Desta cleaned offices in the Loop before dawn and took accounting classes in the afternoon. Sela read everything. Zola fought everyone, not maliciously, but with the instinct of a girl who had decided early that the world was a physical negotiation and she intended to win it. They were not wealthy. They were not comfortable. But they were intact, and intact was everything. Then one Tuesday evening in March, Samuel and Desta stopped for groceries on the way home from church, and 2 men with a dispute that had nothing to do with the Bekele family settled it on the sidewalk outside the store, and by the time Sela and Zola got the call they were already orphans, and the world divided cleanly into before and after. Foster care lasted 11 days. Not because it was terrible, because Sela had already begun building the exit before they arrived. She was 16 and she had been reading about systems long enough to know how to move through them without being captured by them. On the 12th morning they were simply gone, together, with what they could carry and the address of a woman in Pilsen who owed Samuel Bekele a favor he had never collected. The years between Chicago and Seoul are a long education that the story does not linger on but never forgets. Sela learned how money moves underground, the infrastructure of it, the logic, the pressure points. She read organizational theory the way other teenagers read fiction, because she understood instinctively that power without structure is just violence, and violence without purpose is just noise. Zola trained. Anyone who would teach her anything physical she found and extracted from boxing gyms, a Muay Thai instructor in Evanston who charged $40 a session and told her after 3 months that he had nothing left to give her, a former military contractor who ran security seminars out of a Bridgeport warehouse and had never had a student who frightened him until her. At 17 they got the tattoo together. A split Ethiopian cross, clean, geometric, ancient, one half on Sela's right forearm, one half on Zola's. Not matching. Completing. The artist asked what it meant and Sela said, everything. Zola said nothing. The artist did not ask again. At 19 they made the decision. Chicago was saturated, every territory spoken for, every angle occupied by people who had been in the game since before the sisters were born. Starting there would mean years of fighting uphill for scraps. Sela had been studying other cities, other markets, other criminal ecosystems with the cold analytical patience of a chess player who does not move until she sees 5 steps ahead. Seoul kept appearing in her research, a city with sophisticated infrastructure, specific gaps in certain criminal markets, and no one who looked like them operating anywhere near the spaces she had identified. That was the advantage. Not their gender. Not their background. The fact that nobody in Seoul would see them coming, because nobody in Seoul had ever had reason to prepare for them. They arrived with $200 between them, built over 2 years of careful, unglamorous work in Chicago, and a plan Sela had been refining for 8 months. Within 6 months they had their first piece of territory. Within a year they had 3. Within 5 years they had Eclipse. The underworld called them the Eclipse because when the Bekele sisters moved together, everything else went dark. It was not a name they chose. It was a name that came back to them one evening from 3 different sources on the same night, and Sela looked at it and said, "That will do." Zola said, "That will do for now." Nobody asked what came after now. In Eclipse, there was no after. There was only the next move. The Community Development Forum was in Mapogu on a Wednesday evening in November, held in a glass-fronted civic building that smelled like fresh paint and institutional coffee. Sela attended because Eclipse's legitimate front, an urban development consulting firm called Bekele and Associates, immaculately papered and entirely functional, had been invited to participate in a district planning discussion, and Sela attended everything that had the potential to expand their legitimate infrastructure because legitimate infrastructure was the architecture that kept everything else standing. She was not expecting anything to disrupt her attention. She had not had her attention disrupted in years. The man presenting the community housing proposal was Kim Jae-wook, and he presented the way very few people presented anything, without performance, without the self-consciousness of someone who knows they are being watched, with the specific focused energy of a person who cares more about the subject than the impression. He was talking about load-bearing walls and communal courtyards and the relationship between ceiling height and human dignity, and Sela, who was seated in the 3rd row with a notepad and a coffee she was not drinking, stopped writing 7 minutes into his presentation and simply watched him. He was lean, angular-faced, mid-30s, dark straight hair slightly longer than professional and slightly more honest for it. He drew on the projected plans with a laser pointer in his hands at the same time, the way people do when they have forgotten the audience. His Korean was Seoul native, his voice unhurried. He said, "Buildings tell people what they are worth. If you give a community a building that was designed to be cheap and temporary, you are telling the community something about how you see them. We should build as if people deserve permanence." Sela wrote that sentence down. She had not written anything in 7 minutes. After the forum she approached him at the presentation table with a business card and a reason. Bekele and Associates had an interest in the Mapo district planning timeline, and he took the card and looked at it and then looked at her with the particular attention of someone who does not divide their focus. "Bekele," he said. "Ethiopian name." "Yes." "You grew up here?" "I built here," she said. The distinction was deliberate. He heard it. "Jae-wook," he said, and offered his hand. His grip was firm without announcement. They talked for 1 hour. She missed a briefing she had scheduled for 8 o'clock, sent Kemi a one-line message and put her phone in her pocket and kept talking. About the district. About architecture and infrastructure. About what it means to build something in a city that did not initially make space for you. He listened with his full attention in a way that was rare enough to be disorienting. She took a car home at 9:30 and sat in the back seat and looked at the city moving past the windows and did not check her phone for 12 minutes, which had not happened in 4 years. She told Zola the meeting ran long. It was the first lie she had told her sister in 11 years. It was small. It arrived easily, which was the part that stayed with her. Zola Bekele ran Eclipse's street operations with the precision of someone who had been training for exactly this since she was old enough to understand that the world responds to force applied with intelligence. She was not reckless, that was the misunderstanding people made when they heard about her methods. Reckless was what happened when emotion outpaced planning. Zola's emotion and planning operated at exactly the same speed, which was why she was so effective and why she was also, in the particular way of people who feel everything at full volume, vulnerable in directions she had never had cause to examine. 3 weeks after Sela's forum, Kemi mentioned it. One sentence, entirely without intention, Sela had been late to a Tuesday briefing because of a dinner that ran over. Zola had not known about a Tuesday dinner. She had not known there was someone to have dinner with. She sat with that information for 2 days. Then she went to find him herself. His studio was in Hongdae, a converted upper floor above a printing shop, drafting tables and architectural models, and the particular productive disorder of a person who thinks better when their physical space reflects their mental one. He answered the door with reading glasses on his head and a pencil behind his ear and looked at Zola with the brief recalibration of someone whose previous visual data has just been updated unexpectedly. "You're not Sela," he said. "I'm the other one," Zola said, and walked past him into his studio. She had told herself she was vetting him. This was true. She had also told herself this was the only reason. This was less true, and she knew it before she arrived and came anyway. She asked him pointed questions. About his work. About his background. About what exactly he thought was happening with her sister and what his intentions were, which she delivered with the directness of someone who has never found any value in the long way around. He answered everything without deflecting, without the performance of someone trying to pass a test, which paradoxically made him pass it. At one point she picked up a small architectural model from his drafting table, a community center, delicate, painstakingly assembled, and turned it over in her hands, examining it, and he watched her handle it without telling her to be careful, which she noticed. Most people told her to be careful with things. He watched her like he trusted her judgment about what something could withstand. She set it down. She asked, "Does she know you know the consulting firm is a front?" He was quiet for one beat. Then, "I know the firm is real. I know there's more than the firm. I don't know the specifics and I haven't asked." "Why not?" "Because it's not mine to ask yet," he said. "And because whatever the answer is, it doesn't change what I already know about her." Zola looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood and picked up her jacket. "Don't tell her I came," she said at the door. He said, "That's not my secret to keep or tell. That's yours." She left. She walked to her car and sat in it for 4 minutes without starting the engine. Then she drove back to the Eclipse office and told Sela the afternoon had been routine. The second lie. Now they were symmetric. And the ground between them, which had always been the most solid ground either of them stood on, had developed a hairline fracture that neither of them could see yet but both of them could feel. The Hang Collective sent their message on a Friday. One of Eclipse's shipment drivers, a reliable, careful man named Park who had been with them for 3 years, was pulled from his vehicle on the Mapo Bridge, relieved of the cargo, and sent back on foot in his socks. His shoes were left on the bridge railing. It was a particular kind of insult, designed to communicate not just theft but contempt. The Hang Collective were a Chinese-Korean syndicate with established territory in the northern districts, currently pushing south with the specific aggression of an organization that had decided its patience had an expiration date. They had watched Eclipse for 18 months. They had decided the sisters were good but not untouchable. This was their first and most consequential error. Sela had the full intelligence picture within 2 hours of Park's return: location of the Hang Collective's primary processing warehouse in Siademan, shift rotation, entry points, how many men on a Friday night, where the cargo would be staged. She built the response in 40 minutes and briefed Zola over the phone in 8. Zola said, "How many of ours?" Sela said, 4 plus you. "Go in clean, come out clean. I want the ledger more than I want the cargo." Zola said, "You'll have both." She went in at 11:15. The Hang Collective's warehouse was 3 floors of a converted textile building: ground floor storage, second floor processing, third floor where their senior men on duty sat with 2 guards and a laptop and the comfortable assumption that Friday nights were quiet. Zola and 4 Eclipse operatives entered from 2 points simultaneously. She had drilled this particular entry configuration 6 times in the past year on different buildings because Sela believed in preparation and Zola believed in Sela's belief in preparation. The ground floor took 90 seconds. The second floor took 2 minutes because one of the processing team decided to present a physical objection and Zola handled it with the efficient, minimal movement economy of someone for whom violence is not a release but a tool. She used exactly what the situation required and not 1 degree more. Third floor, she went alone. The senior man looked up from his laptop and saw her in the doorway and reached for something in his desk drawer, and she crossed the room in 4 steps and her hand was on his wrist before the drawer was open, and she looked at him with the specific calm of a woman who has already determined the outcome of this conversation and said, "The ledger, the location of my cargo, and the name of whoever authorized this move." In that order. He gave her all 3. People always gave Zola all 3. It was something in her eyes, not cruelty, but the total absence of uncertainty, which was somehow more persuasive than cruelty ever was. She walked out of the building at 11:41 with the shipment rerouted, the ledger under her arm, and a senior Hang Collective man who would spend the rest of the weekend explaining his organization's structure to Eclipse's intelligence team. She called Sela from the car. Sela said, "Clean." Zola said, "Completely." Sela said, "Good." 20 seconds of silence on the line. Not uncomfortable. The particular silence of 2 people who have operated as a single unit for long enough that quiet between them carries its own language. Then Sela said, "Get some sleep." Zola said, "You too." Neither of them slept particularly well. But for different reasons now, and that difference was new. The gallery opening was in Itaewon, a contemporary Korean art space, private invitation, the kind of event that Bekele and Associates attended for legitimate networking and Eclipse attended because the city's money and the city's criminal infrastructure occupied the same rooms more often than either liked to admit. Sela had 2 reasons to be there. She told Zola about one of them. She introduced them near the back of the gallery, in front of a large canvas of geometric shapes in gold and black. Jae-wook shook Zola's hand and looked at her with the same full attention he gave everything, and Zola shook his hand and looked at him with the particular attention of a woman who already knew his studio, the weight of his architectural models, and the way he answered questions he did not have to answer honestly. "Sela mentioned you're working on the Mapo district project," Zola said. "Among others," he said. "What do you think of this one?" He gestured at the canvas. Zola looked at it. "It's trying too hard." "I thought the same thing," he said. "The gold is working against the geometry instead of with it." Sela looked between them. Something in the exchange was already too easy, the specific ease of people who have already established a frequency and are simply returning to it, and she felt it before she could name it and filed it in the place where she put things she was not yet ready to examine. The 3 of them moved through the gallery and the evening was, on its surface, entirely unremarkable. They talked about the art and the district and a new development project Jae-wook was pitching to the city council. He was good with both of them simultaneously in a way that had no calculation in it, which was the part that made it complicated. He was not dividing his attention. He was giving it fully to whoever was speaking, and when both of them were speaking he held both threads without dropping either, and this was simply who he was, and it was the problem. Sela went to get the car. 4 minutes. Jae-wook and Zola stood in front of a small sculpture of interlocking bronze rings. Zola said, "You already know I came to your studio." He said, "I wondered when you would say it." She said, "Why didn't you tell her?" He said, "Because it wasn't mine to tell." She looked at the interlocking rings. "Do you know what you're doing?" He was quiet for a moment. Honest quiet, not evasive. Then, "No." "Do you?" She had no answer. The car arrived. The evening ended. And the thing that had been building in the space between all 3 of them had a shape now, even if none of them had named it yet. Sela found out on a Tuesday. She was reviewing security camera logs from the previous month, routine, something she did every few weeks to cross-reference movement patterns around their key locations. She was not looking for anything specific. She found it anyway. Kemi's vehicle, Zola's preferred car when she did not want to be noticed, which she borrowed regularly, parked outside Jae-wook's Hongdae studio for 43 minutes on a Thursday afternoon 3 weeks prior. Sela looked at the timestamp. Looked at it again. Ran the date against Zola's reported schedule for that day. Routine operations in Mapo, Zola had said. Home by 6. Sela closed the laptop. She sat in her office for 1 hour and 40 minutes without moving. The city ran its noise 14 floors below her. She did not hear it. She was running through 11 years of a relationship with the precision she applied to everything, looking for other moments, other timestamps, other things she had filed under routine that were not routine. She found 2 more she could not fully explain. Small. But she was not a woman who dismissed small. When she went to Zola, she did it in the evening, at the apartment, on neutral ground. She did not lead with anger. Anger was imprecise and she needed to be precise. She said, "You went to see him." Zola was in the kitchen. She went still in the specific way she went still when something had been found that she had not finished deciding how to carry. She said, "Yes." Sela said, "You went to see him and you lied about where you were and you have been in the same room with me every day for 3 weeks and you did not say it." Zola turned around. "You hid him from me for 3 weeks before that." "That is not the same." "It is exactly the same, Sela. You found someone and you put him in a separate compartment from me and you maintained that compartment every single day and you are standing here calling what I did a lie while standing in the wreckage of yours." Sela was quiet. Not because she had no response, because the response that arrived was, "You are right," and she was not ready to give Zola that yet, not while her own chest was doing what it was doing. She said, "I hid him because I knew." Zola said, "You knew what?" Sela said, "That you would feel what you felt." "I knew before you did. And instead of telling you, I hid him, which means I chose him over you before I even admitted to myself that there was a choice being made." The silence that followed that was the longest one they had shared since the hospital corridor in Chicago. Both of them standing in their own kitchen, the same apartment they had kept for 9 years because they said they would never live apart, looking at each other across something that had not been there a month ago. Zola said, "What do we do?" Sela said, "I don't know." Zola looked at the tattoo on Sela's right forearm. Her own right forearm carried its mirror. Together they made the whole cross. She had not looked at it as a question before. She looked at it as a question now. She said, "Does he know what we are?" Sela said, "He knows enough." Zola said, "Does he know about me?" Sela said, "He knows you exist." Zola said, "That's not what I asked." Sela met her eyes. "I know." Jae-wook called Sela on Wednesday evening. She watched his name on her screen for 4 rings and did not answer and then sat with the weight of not answering for the rest of the night. He called again Thursday morning. She answered on the 2nd ring because not answering a second time would have meant something she was not prepared to mean. He said, "Are you all right?" She said, "I'm managing." He said, "Those are different things." She said, "I know that." He said, "Can I come to the office? I need to talk to you. Both of you, if that's possible." She said, "Zola and I are not in the same room right now." A pause. Then, "I see." Another pause. "Is that because of me?" She did not answer immediately. The honest answer and the manageable answer were different answers and she was tired, for the first time in a long time, of choosing the manageable one. She said, "Come to the office Friday. I'll see if Zola comes." She sent Zola one message, "Friday. Office. He wants to talk to both of us. You should be there." Zola's reply came 4 hours later. One word, "Fine." They never made it to a conversation. Friday came, and with it the Hang Collective's second move, the one Sela had been anticipating since the warehouse raid, because she knew the ledger she had taken would tell her things but it would also tell the Hang Collective that Eclipse knew things, and an organization that felt its intelligence had been compromised would either go quiet or go loud, and the Hang Collective had never been the quiet kind. Jae-wook arrived at the Bekele and Associates office at 2 in the afternoon. He was early. He sat in the reception area and waited, and the receptionist brought him water, and he sat with his hands around the glass and thought about what he was going to say and how he was going to say it. He had spent 3 days building the words. He was not sure they were the right ones. He was not sure any words were the right ones. He came anyway. Sela came out to get him at 2:15. She walked him to the main conference room and he sat across the table from her and they were in the middle of a sentence. She was telling him Zola was on her way up from the street, when the building's security alert sounded. Not the standard alarm. The specific 3-tone signal that meant Eclipse protocol, which Jae-wook did not know the meaning of but understood from Sela's face the moment she heard it. She was on her feet before the 3rd tone finished. She looked at him. "Get behind the desk. Stay there. Do not move regardless of what you hear." He said, "Sela." She said, "Jae-wook." One word. The weight of it moved him without further argument. He went behind the desk. What happened in the next 8 minutes Jae-wook would reconstruct later in pieces, the way the mind reconstructs things it was not designed to process in real time. He heard it more than he saw it, movement in the stairwell, voices, the specific percussion of a physical confrontation that is not chaotic but structured, organized, controlled. He heard Sela on the phone in the adjoining room, not panicked, not loud, deploying instructions with the flat rapid precision of a general who has run this scenario in her mind enough times that reality is simply the final rehearsal. He heard Zola's voice from the ground floor through the building's intercom, 2 words, clipped, meaning something in the Eclipse shorthand he did not have the key to. He heard the building go quiet. Then Zola appeared in the conference room doorway. A cut above her right eyebrow, not deep, bleeding in the specific minimal way that cuts on the face bleed regardless of severity. Her jacket was torn at one shoulder. She was breathing slightly elevated and came back down from it in the 3 seconds it took her to scan the room and confirm it was clear. She was the most composed person he had ever seen come out of a fight. Sela came through the other door. They did not look at each other first. They both looked at him, still behind the desk, unhurt, exactly where Sela had told him to stay. He came out from behind the desk. The 3 of them stood in the conference room in a triangle and nobody spoke. Outside the window Seoul was entirely indifferent, traffic, gray afternoon sky, the city doing what cities do. He said, "Are you both all right?" Not, "What was that?" Not, "Who are you people?" Not, "I need to leave." He looked at Zola's cut and then at Sela's face and then back to Zola and said, "Are you both all right?" And the specific order of his concern, both of them, simultaneously, before himself, did something to the air in the room that none of the 3 of them had language for yet. Zola said, "Fine." Sela said, "Sit down." They all sat. Sela spoke first. She said, "You deserve to know exactly what you have been near. Not the version I've been managing. The full version." She told him. Not everything, there were things she would not tell a civilian regardless of circumstance, but the shape of it. Eclipse. The territory. The Hang Collective and what had just happened in the stairwells of this building. What she and Zola had built and how and what it cost and what it continued to cost. She spoke for 11 minutes and her voice was level throughout and Zola sat beside her and said nothing and added nothing because there was nothing to add. It was the truth and the truth did not require 2 voices. When she finished Jae-wook was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've known the consulting firm was a front for about 6 weeks. Sela said, "I know." He said, "I stayed anyway." Sela said, "I know that too." He looked at both of them, Sela directly across the table, Zola to her right, the same face carrying different weather. He said, "I'm not going to pretend I know what to do with what I feel about either of you. I don't think any of us is in a position to pretend that right now." Zola said, "You don't get to feel things about both of us. Pick a direction." He said, "I'm not going to do that." Zola said, "Then what exactly are you proposing?" He said, "I'm not proposing anything. I'm telling you the truth, which is that I have spent 3 weeks trying to build a version of myself that is only drawn to one of you and I cannot build it. That is not flattery. It is a problem and I know it is a problem and I am telling you because I think you already know it and I am tired of everyone in this triangle being careful with the shape of it." Sela looked at the table. Then at him. "We are not a decision you get to defer indefinitely." He said, "I know." She said, "So what are you asking?" He said, "I'm asking if there is any version of this that doesn't end with me losing both of you by refusing to lose either." Zola stood up. She picked up her jacket and looked at the cut above her eyebrow in the reflection of the dark conference room window and pressed 2 fingers against it briefly. She looked at Jae-wook. She looked at Sela. She walked out. The door did not slam. That was somehow worse. Sela and Jae-wook sat in the conference room with the city outside the windows and did not speak for a long time. Finally she said, "You should go." He said, "Sela." She said, "Not permanently. Just tonight. Let me talk to her." He stood. At the door he turned and looked at her, this woman who had built an empire from grief and willpower and the particular stubbornness of someone who refused to let the world's terms be her terms, and said, "I'm not going anywhere. I want you both to know that." She looked at him. "That's the problem," she said. And it was not an accusation. It was just true. Zola made the call to the Hang Collective's parent organization on a Saturday. She told herself it was strategy. She told herself Sela's judgment was compromised, not wrong, not broken, but running at reduced capacity in the specific way of someone who was trying to manage too many things simultaneously and had started letting emotion occupy processing space that strategy needed. She told herself someone had to hold Eclipse steady and that someone was her. She believed some of this. Not all of it. The call took 14 minutes. She offered the Hang Collective's backers a restructured arrangement, certain logistics operations, a specific distribution channel, consolidated under terms that did not require Eclipse to absorb the Hang Collective but created a cooperative framework that neutralized the conflict. It was actually good strategy. That made it worse. Kemi found out because Kemi found out everything eventually. It was why both sisters valued her and occasionally found her inconvenient, and she went to Sela on a Sunday morning with the specific expression of someone delivering information they wish they did not have. Sela listened. She asked 2 questions. She said thank you and meant it. Then she went to find Zola. She did not call. She did not message. She drove to the apartment, their apartment, the one with both their names on the lease and 9 years of shared occupancy and the same kitchen table they had eaten at since year 1. And she used her key and she walked in and Zola was standing at the kitchen counter with a coffee and she looked at Sela and her face did the thing it did when she had already prepared for the version of reality that was arriving. Sela stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she walked to the table and sat down. She said, "Sit down, Zola." Zola sat. What happened in the next 20 minutes was the conversation that every other conversation between them had been postponing for 11 years. Not about the deal. Not about Jae-wook. About Chicago. About the corridor in the hospital. About who had held whom together in the years after and who had needed holding and who had pretended not to need it and what that pretending had cost in the places they had never shown each other. Sela said, "You always thought I was the strong one." Zola said, "You always were." Sela said, "I was the organized one. Those are not the same thing and I let you believe they were because it was easier than telling you that I needed you as much as you needed me and that terrified me because needing something means it can be taken." Zola was quiet for a long time. Then, "I made the deal because I was angry." Sela said, "I know." Zola said, "It's still good strategy." Sela said, "I know that too." Zola looked at the tattoo on her own forearm. Her half of the cross. "I don't know how to want something for myself," she said. "I only know how to want things for Eclipse. For us. And then he appeared and I wanted something just for me and it turned out you wanted the same thing and I didn't know what to do with that so I burned something instead." Sela looked at her own forearm. The other half. She put it on the table. Zola looked at it for a moment, then put hers beside it. The cross, whole again, on the kitchen table between 2 cups of coffee in the apartment they had shared for 9 years. Sela said, "I don't know what we do about him." Zola said, "Neither do I." A knock at the door. Both of them looked up. Looked at each other. Sela said, "Did you?" Zola said, "No." "Did you?" Sela said, "No." The knock came again. 3 knocks. Measured, calm, the knock of someone who is not leaving. The sisters looked at each other across the kitchen table, their tattoos side by side, the split crosshole between them, 9 years of an empire and 1 man and everything they had nearly broken to get to this moment. Neither of them moved. The knock came a 3rd time. Zola said quietly, "Who knows this address?" Sela said, 3 people. One of them is Kemi." Zola said, "And the other 2? Sela looked at the door. The knock did not come again. What came instead was a voice, low, unhurried, Seoul native, the voice of a man who had watched them take apart 3 armed men and had asked afterward if they were all right. He said, "Through the door, I'm not going anywhere. I told you that. I meant it." Silence in the kitchen. The city outside. The tattoos on the table. Zola looked at Sela. Something moved across her face, not resolution, not surrender, something more complicated and more honest than either. She said, "He found the address." Sela said, "Yes." Zola said, "We didn't give it to him." Sela said, "No." A long pause. Zola looked at the door. Then back at Sela. He's an architect, she said. He finds things. Sela almost, smiled. She stood. She walked to the door. Her hand on the handle. She looked back at Zola one more time. Zola gave her nothing. Gave her everything. The Bekele way, the thing that required no language between them because it lived somewhere deeper than language. Sela opened the door. And that is where we leave them tonight, dark romance family, one door open, two women who built an empire from grief standing on the other side of it, and a man who found an address nobody gave him because some people do not know how to stay away from the things that matter to them. Did he choose? Did they let him? Can an empire survive a heart divided and then, possibly, made whole in a configuration nobody planned for? The Hang Collective's backers have a new representative arriving in Seoul next week. He has a file. The file has 3 names in it. And one of those names is an architect who designed a community center in Mapogu and had no idea, until very recently, what kind of women he had walked into the orbit of. Subscribe so you are here when we go back. Drop a comment, tell me what you think is on the other side of that door. And share this with someone who understands that the most dangerous love stories are the ones where nobody is the villain. We will see you next time.